you can take this to the bank. You can't hide a great song. You can't. If you write a great song, all you've got to do is write it and sing it where you are, and it will be heard.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Song Revolution podcast, brought to you by Nashville Christian Songwriters. Nashville Christian Songwriters exists to empower Christian songwriters worldwide. I'm John Chisum, and this podcast exists to bring you valuable songwriting insights, inspiration, interviews, and just all around good fun with some of the greatest songwriters, producers, arrangers, artists, and creatives, and beyond. You can find out a whole lot more about us at NashvilleChristianSongwriters.com. Hey everybody, welcome to the show. It's always a privilege to have you join us here on the Song Revolution. We exist to inspire and to encourage you, to bring you the best people, the best interviews and teaching that we can find on Christian songwriting. And today's episode is no different. I reached back into the archives to get one of my favorite shows with my cousin by marriage, Mike Harland. Mike is a prolific songwriter. He is incredibly talented. We've written some together. He's kind of a statesman in so many ways for the Christian music industry, and he is the director of LifeWay Worship. If you're not familiar with LifeWay, you should be, because they publish thousands of songs from children's all the way to senior adults. I mean, these people do hymnals, for crying out loud, right? So they have a global impact that you should be aware of. And Mike, on this episode, he really gets down to some down-to-earth wisdom about publishing and about songwriting and so many things that he said on this show. I repeat to people, and I usually give him credit. Mike, if you're listening, I usually give you credit for these great gems. But man, he just drops some value bombs on this episode. And in case you missed it, or even if you didn't, you'll benefit from listening to it again. So grab a pen and a pad, maybe a sweet tea, and take a few minutes with me and my cousin, director of LifeWay Worship, Mike Harland. The inimitable, unusual, and amazing Dr. Mike Harland, the director of LifeWay Worship. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you, John. It's great to see you. Yeah. Great to talk to your audience.
Man, we're so glad to have you. You're a giant in this whole thing. Yeah, you are, dude. You are so amazing. And just such a legacy of publishing work in this town for many, many years. And so it's great to talk with you today.
It's great to be here.
Yeah, so just want to kind of relax, have some conversations. So
sure.
Tell us a little bit,
First of all, John, I'm interrupting you.
Okay, go ahead.
But we've got to tell your audience our connection. We have to.
I started to.
Yeah, you started. Do you want to tell them?
Well, a little nepotism, I guess.
There's a little, you would never know that John Chisum and Mike Harland are actually related to each other by marriage.
Yes.
It's actually our wives that are related to each other.
That's right, yeah.
So
we're sort of distant.
We both, are we like second cousins-in-law? Is that what we are? I don't know. But Donna and my wife Teresa are first cousins.
That's right. So, they had the same grandma.
Same grandma. Yeah, that's exactly right. So I met you long before. It's kind of funny, but long before you were writing songs, but you hadn't had anything published yet.
Right.
And I certainly had never. You were published and off on your way as a writer long before I was. And I'm not saying you're older than I am. I'm just saying that you had stuff happen sooner than I did. But I remember when we met. I think probably about the time you and Donna got married, about the time me and Teresa got married, and you were on your journey and I was on my journey, and here we are. I mean, think about this, 30 whatever years later, we're sitting here talking about songwriting. That's kind of crazy.
I'm just happy to be anywhere talking about anything.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, it's true. I mean, we grew up in Memphis.
Yeah.
And were you down in Mississippi?
I grew up in North Mississippi, but Teresa, my wife, grew up in Memphis.
Right.
And of course, her family was all there. And of course, Donna was that strain from one aspect of her family. They were all in Memphis. We call them the Memphis Mafia. But
maybe
it's funny how our
buried money.
It's funny how our paths crossed way back then and now crossing today.
Wow. Yeah. And to just think of the trajectory of our lives and to still be here making an impact in the church and to be the director of LifeWay Worship and working with writers, putting out lots of products. Tell us a little bit about that, what you're doing.
Well, LifeWay Worship is the music arm of LifeWay Christian Resources, which a lot of people know who LifeWay Christian Resources would be because of our stores. We have a bunch of stores all over the country, even around the world. But I'm in the part of the company. I don't work in the store part of the company. I relate to those folks, but I don't have responsibility to the stores. Some people think I'd put the CDs on the shelves. I really don't do that.
Stock boy.
But I'm in the other part of the company, which is the resource area, which makes stuff for churches. And so LifeWay Worship stewards that process of, if you think about all that churches do in music, the LifeWay Worship is the part of LifeWay that stewards that aspect of church life. And we do make, we are a publisher, and we have songwriters that are writing songs, and we are making product for choirs and orchestras and bands and all of that. But we also, because we serve the church, we're not just a manufacturer of stuff. We are a resource company to the church first and foremost. So we also have the privilege of getting other people's songs. We represent literally every company in Christian music we relate to one way or the other. And we learned a long time ago that we weren't good enough to make everything. So we kind of had this philosophy that whatever God is using and whatever the church is needing, we feel our responsibility is to get it to them. If it happens to be something we wrote or we made, great. That's a short path. But if it's something that somebody else is doing, we want to get that to the church just as eagerly. Because at the end of the day, we exist. We are a ministry. We're a nonprofit company. And we exist to resource the church, period. We want to do that with a healthy business model just so we can keep doing it. But we're not primarily driven by a profit motivation. We don't have a board of directors. We don't have shareholders. We are a entity of the church, and that's the high calling that we have. I felt years ago a calling to ministry. I didn't lay that down when I came to LifeWay. This is just an expression of the same call I had all those years ago when you and I first met. And that was to lead people in worship, and now I do it from a different seat. But,
wow, that's fantastic. But you actually came up through the ranks as a songwriter, and now here, how long have you been here? And maybe give us a little of that process.
Well, it's the older you get, the longer it takes to tell this story. But I've been at LifeWay 12 years now. It's kind of hard for me to believe that, but I came to LifeWay from the church. I was associate pastor of worship, First Baptist Church, Carrollton, Texas, at the time I came to LifeWay, and I'd been in a worship pastor kind of role for 25 years. I got my master's degree in church music from New Orleans Seminary, and then from there began to serve churches in a worship pastor role. And along the way was writing songs that kind of wove its way into my ministry of what I was doing in a local church. And honestly, John, my story is a little different than probably some people. I came into songwriting from an industry perspective, kicking and screaming. I didn't set out to do this. I really didn't. I was writing songs, but really more of a devotional, personal thing for me. I'd be in the sanctuary of my church. I'd be reading a verse of scripture. I'd go to the piano and just begin to sing, and songs were being born, but I really wasn't. I didn't send them to publishers. I wasn't making demos. I was just, and then occasionally I would sing songs that I had written for an occasion or two. But I really never set out to be a songwriter. I just was writing songs that were on my heart. And I would tell people, looking back on those years, I might write 2 songs a year. In that season of my life, not really prolific at all, not really trying to be. It was just an overflow from my life. And two artists come along in that journey, both really interesting. The first one was Brent Lamb, which I know you know Brent really well.
Absolutely.
Brent's uncle was minister of music of the church where I was his associate. Brent's uncle, Ron Lamb. And I had sung a song in church that Ron really liked that I'd written. And so he calls me over to his house one night, and literally Brent is sitting there. I didn't know Brent was going to be there, but he said, my nephew's in town. I want you to meet him. And, of course, I knew who Brent was, Household of Faith, and some of the other things he had done. But I was kind of a little bit starstruck to meet somebody that was a contemporary Christian artist and with a mullet, I'll add, in case Brent's ever listens to this.
Yours or his?
No, his. I didn't have a mullet, but everybody knows Brent Lamb had a doozy, him and Stephen Curtis Chapman. But so Ron goes back to the back of the house and brings a guitar out and puts it in my hands and said, sing that song for Brent. And I went, what song are you talking about? The one you sang in church 2 weeks ago. And I sang the song, and it became the title song of his next record. Song called Side by Side. I don't even remember. Remember Brent's record that had his twin boys on the cover?
I do remember.
Well, it was
Hunter
that song. Hayden. And, yeah. And so Side by Side was the first song I had ever written, which I wrote for Teresa, my wife. And I didn't have this dream of it getting heard or cut or anything, nothing like that. But it literally happened that way, where Ron said, sing it for him. I sang it for him. And the next thing I knew, I had a song that was on the radio.
Wow.
Yeah. And then go 7 years after that, and an artist comes to my church and does a concert. And that night, it was kind of magical. We just kind of hit it off, just like a guy I didn't even know. And by the time that night was over and the dinner was over, we were best friends. He wound up moving to my church. And about 3 or 4 weeks after he had moved there and joined our church to base his ministry in our church, we go to lunch. And he says, hey, I hear you write songs. I said, yeah, I've written 2 or 3, Well, play me something. And I said, well, here's one I just finished. And I played this song for this artist, and I turned around and look at him. He's bawling his eyes out and says, I'm going to record that.
Wow.
And I went, why? And he said, hey, let's write down the chord chart and give me the lyric. I want to start singing that immediately. The artist was Luke Garrett, and the song was Playing Games at the Foot of the Cross.
Nice.
Which I had
Great
just written in a quiet time in my church. Had never sung it for anybody, never been performed. I said, oh, here's something I wrote the other day. And Luke winds up recording it, begins to sing it. Well, everybody has a story, right? So here's the story. About a month later, Luke is out on the road singing that song. He's at a conference in Memphis, the old J&J Choral Conference.
Yeah.
He was singing a concert at that, and he sang it in that conference. Well, Tom Fetty is in the room. And Fetty walks up to Luke and says, I want that song for a musical I'm writing right now. And Luke says, well, I didn't write it. Well, who did write it? He gave him my name, gave him my phone number. And that next day, Tom Fetty calls me at home and says, I want that song.
Wow.
Well, I didn't have a publisher. And of course, I knew who I started, as a matter of fact, I didn't even believe it was him when he first told me who it was. and long story short, I wound up being introduced to Niles Borup. And Niles heard that song, decided he wanted to publish it. Word wound up using it in a musical, did it as an anthem. It was incredibly successful as an anthem. The thing just absolutely took off. And Niles then began to say, hey, I want to hear more things that you've written. The secret was I hadn't written that much. I just had a handful of things. And he said, come to Nashville. I came to Nashville, and I'll never forget, I sang 3 songs for him. He said, I don't like any of those songs. But then he said, but you've got a talent, and I want to help you develop it. And that's really where the journey starts for me as a writer. Niles Borup got involved in my life. I became a writer for Synergy Music, which was his company at the time. And he started pouring into me.
Wow.
Taught me how to beat up a song and wad it up and throw it away and start it over. And taught me to not settle for what was easy, but to go for what was great. And I went from writing 2 or 3 songs a year to writing 150 a year.
Wow.
Because he kind of gave me I was motivated. And then in those early days, there was like 4, 5, 6 really critical songs that just all kind of hit and found their way. And before I knew it, I'm a songwriter. And I say I came into this kicking and screaming because I didn't plan to do that.
Yeah.
But the Lord was in it. And then, of course, I'm still a worship pastor of a church. And then my songs began to find their way into the church. And without trying to, my songs became less artist-oriented, more choir-oriented. And my songs started coming in print. And then I started, I guess, a logical progression, but I started writing musicals. And I wrote one for Littleness, and I was involved in one for Word, and I was involved in one for Brentwood Benson, back then, Brent Benson. And then I wrote one for LifeWay. And then I wrote another one for LifeWay, and I wrote another one for LifeWay. And the years are going by, and then on the day they decided they needed a new director of this department, Dr. Jimmy Draper decided, he was the president then, they wanted somebody from the church. So they began to look for the criteria of somebody with a seminary degree, someone that had experience leading worship in churches of all sizes, and someone that had been a contributor to the industry. And it turned out to be me. And 12 years ago, I came here. So I didn't design any of that. If you were looking for the book of how do you get to Nashville into I can't.
How do you get Mike Harland's job?
I can't write that book because I didn't write this one.
Wow.
And God just did it, and I'm still amazed.
Wow.
Still amazed.
That's a beautiful story. I don't know if you know my story a whole lot, but we moved here to take a church job in 1983, fall of 83. The job fell through. We had $40 and no place to live.
Wow.
And in a couple of months, my precious wife, Donna, that we mentioned earlier, she said we'd had such a weird first 3 years of our marriage. And it's like, worked in 4 churches in 3 years, right? And it's like, when is this insanity going to stop? And she said, can't we just stay here and be normal people? So I wound up with a paper route, throwing papers out of the car at 3 a.m. and made $60 a week. But within 2 months, through a mutual casual friend, I'd met Gary McSpadden and Bill Gaither, and they listened to a couple of my songs. They signed me to a publishing deal at Arios Music, their new deal. My first year, I had 19 songs recorded. And wound up with a whole career, So it's a similar deal. It's like, I'm convinced that, Ephesians 3, right? That we're he's able to do exceedingly abundantly above and beyond what we can ask or think. I was too stupid to ask for this. And so. Not to call you stupid, but I mean, you kind of just kind of.
I was as stupid as you were. But boy, we both married real well, didn't we?
We married up, man. I'm telling you.
Oh, yeah.
Dang, 37 years for us this year.
Yeah. We're celebrating 36. So y'all got married about a year before we did.
Yeah, it was 80. And just,
Your mother-in-law was at our wedding.
Yeah.
I remember her being there. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy?
It is crazy, man.
Well, and here's the thing, John. I teach at Liberty University as an adjunct, and I'm often speaking to the songwriting classes there. And this is something I say every time, is you can't map that out. That your part of that equation is just being who God made you to be. That what He has designed you to do would blow your mind if you knew it. But with the mistake I see young writers making sometimes, and I understand why they make it, is they focus most of their energy on what they can do instead of focusing their energy on being who they could be, who they should be. Because if you'll be who God wants you to be, He takes care of the doing what He wants you to do. That happens. I think about Abram, and who became Abraham, not because of who he was, not because of what he could do, but because of who he was. I think about Moses. He wasn't qualified. It wasn't what he could do. It was because of who he was. He was a person who could interact with a burning bush from a place of faith. So his character mattered so much more than his ability did. And I tell young writers, every ounce of energy you spent on trying to be heard, and I realize some of that's got to happen to a degree, is energy you're not spending on being the right person and writing something that's worthy of being heard.
That's rich.
Spend your energy creatively, not on the publishing part. Find other people that will help you with that part. A company like LifeWay. But spend your energy being who God wants you to be.
Wow.
And He'll open the doors in front of you. You'll never know which ones to knock on, but He does.
Wow. Yeah. I just think that's so deep and rich, and it's simple, but it's not easy.
No, it's not easy.
All the time.
Not easy. My most frustration as a songwriter was in those years, long before anything was ever cut or done, when I had written something I thought was worthy, and I couldn't get anybody paying attention to it. That was frustrating. Like, man, I've got this song. I know. I've seen people cry when I sing it. My mama loves this song. My home church stands up every time I sing it. So why won't anyone else listen to it? And I remember how frustrated that was. And that frustration will shut you down creatively. The day you start living in that frustration, you won't be writing any more songs. So don't get into that place of fretting over the platform. God will give you the platforms. They're His to give, not yours to find.
Wow, man, that's great. And I think even where you and I are, I think we have to remember those same things. That doesn't question. Go away. We're going to take just a quick break and talk about something that I think is going to be very valuable for you as a Christian songwriter. So check it out.
Do you feel like God's given you a bunch of songs, but you don't know what to do with them? Do you feel like you've got a real call on your life to write, but you're clueless about where to start? Or maybe you've got writer's block and you're wondering if you'll ever get the creative juices flowing again. Well, we've got you covered with NCS membership. NCS membership is all about community and how to grow in this calling you feel deep inside to be heard. We get it. We know that you just want to honor God with your talents and be a good steward of what He's given you. And that's why NCS membership could be your next right step to grow, learn, be challenged, get connected, and ultimately fulfill your dreams to glorify God and reach others with the same passion you feel. It's designed to help you tell your story and to reach listeners who will love your songs. With your NCS membership, you'll receive 24/7 access to valuable masterclasses on topics such as modern hymn writing, worship writing, song form, lyric development, and recording home demos, as well as discounts for other NCS products and a deep connection into a community of creatives who get you. There are a lot of songwriters out there, so you need to be the best you can be to stand out, be heard, and become the songwriter you were born to be. Just go to NashvilleChristianSongwriters.com now to check out all the great benefits of becoming part of a decidedly Christian community of songwriters from all over the world. NCS membership, your next right step to being heard.
Well, I just hope that you'll take advantage of that and check it out. All right? We bring you good stuff here on the Song Revolution podcast. So back to our episode.
We don't try to sign writers and just acquire songs to build catalogs. That's really not what we're about. We actually are looking for songs and people that we know exactly what we would do with that right then. And that some of that is just stems from my own experience as a songwriter. A songwriter's worst nightmare is to turn over one of your babies to a publisher that's not going to do anything with it. Mm-hmm. And yet now that publisher owns it, and you can't. If you owned it, there's something you would do this, you do that, you do this, but now he owns it and he's not doing anything with it. That is so frustrating. Yeah. So what we don't do is we don't say to writers, hey, we want to sign that song. There are songs sent to us that we love, but we can't use. And we'll say, you know what, we're not going to sign it because we're not going to tie up the publishing of something that we don't have a plan for.
Sure.
So our writers are all specialized. They have areas where they aim exactly for, and we use what they write. And then we also are pitching. We get cuts all the time across town.
Oh, that's great.
Because our writers are not just writing what we use, but when we think there's a song here that really should be over there or that artist or whatever. Jackie Velasquez has a new single out right now that's one of our songs. I mean, that gives you an example of we're working with Point of Grace right now on their Christmas record they're working on. So we do have artist stuff happening all the time, and we think more of that will happen in the future. But we have about 12, 13 writers, and they're all busy and writing great songs. So it's a privilege.
Well, I mean, I know that everybody listening to this podcast now is like, oh, can I send my songs? Can I send my songs? And I think the answer is probably no.
Yeah, I mean, it's not, you know what? I'm always, I'm so sensitive to that because I know what that feels like. And my encouragement to those folks are be patient about that. Your opportunity will come. You're right. We couldn't say to the world, hey, send us your songs. We have done it before for a short season. We've like, hey, right now we're just wanting to hear a bunch of songs. So send us something. Today's not one of those days. And and the reason is I wouldn't want writers out there to be frustrated with this, but I'd want them to understand that that's not fair to their song if a publisher is willing to take all. Because your song is not served well when it gets into that stack. It doesn't serve it well. It won't be listened to. I mean, there are stories of how songs find their way into a stack of tapes somewhere, and there are stories like that, but they're very, very much the exception. If a publisher opened their gates, nobody would be served well. because none of those songs would get the hearing that they really need to get.
Yeah, so. Absolutely. Well, and the number one thing that I deal with at Nashville Christian Songwriters, the number one question, and you know this, is how can I be heard?
Yeah.
And I always come back with, well, you've got to have something worth hearing first.
Yeah.
And so, we're geared, our whole mission statement is to empower Christian songwriters worldwide. And the way we do that through our training and resources is to help them get the level of their writing up, because writers have this fantasy that if they can just be heard by the right people, they're going to suddenly get a song cut or be a hit. And it really doesn't work that way.
No, it doesn't.
And so, maybe address that just a little bit.
I'd love to.
Yeah.
I love to talk about that, because here's a principle I realized years ago that you can take this to the bank. You can't hide a great song. You can't. If you write a great song and all you've got to do is write it and sing it where you are, and it will be heard. And I have a couple examples I usually tell about that. A struggling ex-Catholic priest writes a song in his dorm room. And next year we'll celebrate the 500th anniversary of A Mighty Fortress Is Our God. Now, we're not singing A Mighty Fortress Is Our God because he knew the right publisher to send it to. The reason we're still singing A Mighty Fortress Is Our God, which, by the way, you wrote a beautiful thing that Steve Green did on the front of that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just remember that. The reason we still sing it is because it's great. It's great, and in God's providence, it is intended to be sung. And I just want to take myself imagination into that room when Martin Luther first wrote it. I don't think he was worried that night about whether or not it would ever get heard, because that wasn't the point of it.
Right.
So God becomes the publicist, really. I mean, there are companies that are in the process, but God is the one that helps song find their way. And then the other example I always like to give, more in the modern setting, is there's this little Disciple Now band. That's what I called them, in Dallas, Texas. That's just going church to church to church every weekend, doing a 2-hour concert and getting $250. And they do that for 10 years. And one of them's grandfather dies, and he writes a song about his grandfather, and he just sings it in the places where they're singing. And Mercy Me is born, and I Can Only Imagine is the song that everybody that listening to this knows. All right, so what's the lesson here? The lesson is, if you'll write that song, and to your point, that has that quality and nature about it that sometimes, quite frankly, even song publishers can't fully describe. It's an inherent quality that God somehow puts inside a song that is intended to be heard. Then all you've got to do as a songwriter is sing it where you are. If it's a small group Bible study with 6 people, if it's at a church fellowship after church, if it's at a youth revival, if it's a Disciple Now concert, whatever it is, just write the song and be faithful to sing it where you are. And if it's great, Nashville will find you. You don't have to find Nashville. Nashville will find you, because those songs can't be hidden. This person hears it, that person hears it, they talk about it, you sing it here, that person starts singing it, and on and on and on it goes, and it finds its way. And that's literally how it happens. So this idea that if I could just know the right person, if I could just be heard, and you might make some connections, and you might see some results, but if the song's not great, it's not going to matter long. And the real prudent thing is to be faithful in the place where you are with what God gives you there, and He takes it from there. And that it sounds almost like a default, or it's not on us to find those songs. No, those songs take on a life and a character of their own, and they find their way. You can't hide a great song. You can't hide one. If you write a great song and sing it, I'm telling you, the day will come when the world will hear it.
Wow.
That's just true.
That's a great. I remember meeting Kirk and Debbie Dearman in 1988, and they had written "We Bring the Sacrifice of Praise." Yep. I think in 80. Yeah. And they
just were singing it.
Yeah, they were singing. I think in a church in Dallas, and it wound up becoming like CCLI's top song forever. It's kind of fallen now,
forever.
But I mean, here we are. 37 years later,
Exactly.
And so just crazy how God breathed on that song. And I think of Linda Shazo that I helped manage at Integrity. And, Lord, you are more precious than silver.
Yes.
And amazing how God just blessed.
Yeah.
So I think we do get kind of all uptight about doing this thing and figuring it out, writing the formula stuff. And, you know, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, modern worship and kind of the whole worship movement that has brought us to this place where now songwriters are imitating Bethel and Jesus Culture and Hillsong, and everybody's trying to be that. And also kind of in that same discussion, what are your thoughts on what some have called the dumbing down of worship songs?
That's a great question. I don't know that you can describe any of it with terms that apply every time. There are exceptions so many ways. One of the burdens I feel, I go to a lot of colleges, and Liberty is one of them, but I go to a lot of colleges to talk about ministry and songwriting and all of that stuff. And this is a burden. This is an observation I make every year. It's uncanny that when I come away from the Dove Awards in the first week of October, and 2 weeks or 3 weeks later when I'm on campus of a college campus in a worship department, I will hear 3 weeks later songs that are imitating what I just heard at the Dove Awards. And it's a burden. That's a burden to me because as important as what Bethel is doing is, we don't need another Bethel. We have a Bethel. We don't need another Hillsong. We've got a Hillsong. We've got a Gateway. God has raised up some of these ministries, and they're contributing significant songs.
Absolutely.
And thank God for them. But we don't need another generation of people that are imitating what those churches and those ministries have that God has given them to do. What I tell the artist development students at Liberty that I teach is I don't need to hear you sounding like Lauren Daigle. I need to hear what you sound like. I need, because here's a little formula I use a lot when I talk to aspiring writers and artists, is I put songs in 3 categories. I say they're good, they're great, or they're commercial. And I go back to the first one and go, you never heard a bad song? I say, yeah, I guess I've heard a bad song, but I would say the writing of them is worth it so much that I would say any song that a child of God sits down with a piano or a guitar or even a pen and writes in a spiritual experience, if it does nothing more than draw that writer closer in their relationship with the Lord, that's a good song. It may never be heard by anybody else, but it was worth writing. It's good.
Yeah.
Great would be a song that shows some character, some skill, there's a rhyme that's consistent. There's a syntax about it that's consistent. There's an interesting melodic hook. And there may even be something significant the song is saying. And you would say, you listen to that song and you would say, that song's great. And that song will work in the church when you, the writer, sing it, and it might even work in the church across town when the story is told about how it was written. That song has a place. It may never be on an artist record. It may never be sung by anybody else. But that song's great because it had an impact on you. It had an impact on your family. It had an impact on your church. It was worth writing. Then that third category is commercial. Well, the biggest difference between great and commercial, a commercial bears all of those same traits. It's well-crafted, it's written, it's not clunky, it's clear, it's theologically sound. It has all these attributes about it. But here's the differentiator most of the time. It's unique. It's just saying something that hasn't been said that way. It's saying something that is done in a refreshing way, a way that makes me sit up and want to hear it a little more. There's a uniqueness about it. And a specific aspect of it that is not like anything else. And the distance between good and great can be learned. The distance between great and commercial, I don't know you can learn that difference, but if you're just replicating the greatness of other songs, then you'll never get to commercial. You'll never motivate me as a publisher to publish your song if your song sounds like every other song I've heard that year. I love Holy Spirit, the Bethel tune. I don't need another one of those. I've got Holy Spirit. I need a song and the reason I love that song is because it's been a long time since they sung that with that much passion and intimacy, and we sang to and acknowledging that aspect of the Trinity beautifully. My nephew used that song in his wedding, and it was one of the most beautiful things in that wedding. Loved it. but I don't need another one of those.
Yeah,
I've got
like
that one.
Good Father.
Exactly.
Everybody's trying to imitate that.
I don't need another one of those. I don't need something that imitates it musically, and I don't need something that imitates it lyrically. I need something that's new and different. And that is the difference between great and commercial. Is it unique? Because I hear songs all the time, younger writers, and when I hear the demo, it's beautifully produced. They can sing, they can play, but gosh, that's just like 10 other songs that I've already heard.
Right.
And I'll pass on that song, even though there's nothing wrong with it. I'd tell the writer, there's nothing in the world wrong with that song. It's so good. I bet you get a great reaction when you sing it. But I can't invest in it because I've got 10 others just like it that I can't. So the difference between good and great and commercial is something that writers need to be aware of and need to understand that the unique aspects of a song is what makes it commercial.
Wow, that's great. Yeah. Great. Okay, I'm gonna jump subjects just a little bit here for you. How can I say this? The national hymn writer of China is a woman named Zhao Min. And Zhao Min was a peasant girl on whom, shall we say, God has literally, she's basically uneducated, certainly didn't know songwriting skills. She has written, I don't remember if it's 8,000 hymns. Her songs are sung in every house church and the state church in China. Uneducated, never took a songwriting class in her life. And she is the one person that I could look at in all the world and say, God gives her songs. She'd be out in the field with, I don't know how she did it, but from total obscurity in the field to becoming the national hymn writer for China.
Amazing.
And that's so unusual, isn't it?
It's pretty interesting. But it also points to the reality that there's all kinds of education. She may be uneducated in one sense, but she's a student of something. Because what we write and create is an overflow of what we take into our lives, So I don't know her personally. I've heard that story before. Yeah. I bet she is a student of the Word of God. I bet she is in deep and stays long for that much prolific, like somebody like a Fanny Crosby.
Exactly. That's
who turns out to be one of the great theologians of her era. We think of her as the hymn writer, but good Lord, did she have some insight theologically?
Yes, she did.
And she didn't get that in school. She got that in another way as a student.
Well, so the discussion then, and I love your perspective on that Zhao Min, is getting this from somewhere. But, the number one thing people say to me is, God gave me the song. How many times have you heard that?
Absolutely.
And then I try to be very nice. Sometimes I think inside, a couple of things. It's like, okay, number one, don't blame that on God. That's kind of one of them.
Well, the one I always use is, I don't think he did, because I believe he would have written a better song than that.
Right. Exactly. Right. Or the other one is like, well, I guess he gave it to you because he didn't want it anymore.
Exactly.
But, all snarkiness aside.
And by the way, I've written some of those myself.
Me too. Me too. So, what do you say when it comes to the craft and learning the craft and some tips? I don't believe in tips, tricks, and hacks. I think that's just stupid. But because this stuff is hard won for all of us. But do you have anything that you'd say to our writers, that might just help them a little bit on their journey that as they're listening to this today?
Well, I want to say one thing that I think is important for writers to hear, and I think we undervalue the process of writing songs, the impact that has on you, the writer. And that's why, to reiterate what I said a minute ago, I don't think there's any such thing as a bad song. There's a song that may not be commercial. There's a song that may not be great. It may not even be good in a technical sense. But the process of sitting down with pen and paper or with instrument and writing, pouring your heart out to God in song. We have 72 Psalms in the Psalter that David wrote, attributed to David. How many do you think he wrote in his lifetime? 10,000? I mean, if you were watching sheep, all day long. You'd probably write a lot of songs.
Yeah, absolutely.
Why don't we hear the rest of them? Well, because they were for him. And I would tell any writer out there, I would always ask writers this question: is it enough for you as a writer? Are you grateful for the craft and the opportunity to write if God is the only one that ever hears it? And I would say, and if you don't get there as a songwriter, you may not deserve to write one everybody else hears. But when you get to the place where you can so appreciate the process of what it does in you as you sing it for him, if you get to the point where that becomes its own reward, now you're ready to write a great song the rest of us can hear. So I don't want to minimize anybody that's writing anything, whether it's a 6-line sonnet or whatever it is. If it's coming out of your heart for God, it was worth writing and important that you write it. But beyond that, craftsmanship-wise, yes, we are looking for songs that make sense. We're looking for songs that say something that's true, that's biblical. We're looking for songs that have a good vocabulary of words that are all stylistically linked to each other. That they're not all over the map, but there's a sense about what they do and how they say it. There's a syntax about it, a rhyme structure that is consistent. And then musically, a lot of those same attributes. An interesting chord progression with a melody that has shape and architecture that is memorable. If you come to me with a song that you've written and sing it for me once, 10 minutes later, can I hum that melody back? Is it that kind of, And so, yes, there are things to look for lyrically and musically that represent craftsmanship. And yes, to the work that you do as you're helping writers develop that's important that writers do that. There's a quote attributed to Abraham Lincoln. Of course, there's this also fun thing that people attribute all these quotes to Abraham Lincoln, whether he said them or not. But here's one that I've heard attributed to him. When asked President Lincoln, what would you do if you had 4 hours to cut wood? He said, I'd sharpen my axe for 3. I would spend the first 3 hours sharpening my axe. And I would say to any songwriter out there, sharpen your axe, sharpen it, learn, go to conferences like the one you're doing, go to places like Worship Life, go to these places where you can listen to people. I think about Sue Smith and Write About Jesus, one of the great conferences I know about. Go to those places. Listen to people that have walked that road. I write a lot with Dave Clark, and I like to just hear Dave Clark talk about songwriting because it just comes out of his pores.
Yeah, I'm going to get him on the show.
Yeah, he knows how to do
great.
it. And he's forgotten more about writing songs than I know. I mean, he just lives it. And it's so that there are things to learn, but I would also say to anyone out there, there's not a list. If you do these 10 things, you'll have a hit song. That doesn't exist either.
Right, it doesn't.
Because you and I could sit here the rest of the day and talk about song after song after song that violate every craft principle that we could ever teach. Yeah. So there's a God factor in all of that too. That's hard. I think about the song I use sometimes as an example is the song Shout to the Lord. Well, it's obvious that God in his providence, matter of fact, you were Integrity during those days, you know that, you know what that song was doing and what it did, and we still sing it. Today, it's sung all over the world. That song breaks almost every rule that any songwriting teacher would ever give you.
It totally does.
It does, and yet, I get chill bumps thinking about singing it.
Right.
So there's no way to quantify that, but yes, learn the craft, learn those specific traits. I think you look back at songs and you can say, look how it did this, this, and this, and this, that the writer, when they wrote it, had no idea they were doing. But there's a lot to be learned about craftsmanship. And any writer that wants to grow in this craft needs to pursue that knowledge.
Right. It's kind of getting in the environment, getting in that space in your head where you learn all about the craft and then you kind of forget it to go do what you do and let the Lord anoint it and direct it.
That's a great way to say it. I think about a baseball player who will spend hour after hour after hour learning the techniques of fielding, of batting. But when he's in the game, he's not thinking about that. He's playing baseball.
It's automatic.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you're in that flow. Yeah, that's great.
That's a good way to say that.
Well, Mike Harland, I know that we could keep going because man, you're a deep well, man. You got so much behind you and so much ahead of you. I know we could talk about 6-7 more hours about all this stuff and get into some deep stuff, and as well as just the mechanics of songwriting. So thank you so much.
It's a privilege
for being here. So this is John Chisum for the Song Revolution podcast, and we're here to make a difference, and we hope that you will join the Song Revolution. We'll see you next time. Hey, what a fantastic show today. I hope you caught all the value bombs that were dropped on this one and that you'll begin to immediately incorporate them into your songwriting. You know, you can get even more valuable songwriting tools and inspiration when you join NCS membership. You can become a part of a growing community of songwriters from around the world and tap into some of the most powerful resources available to step you up in your songwriting destiny. Check out NCS membership now at NashvilleChristianSongwriters.com and get ready for some exponential power to help you fulfill your call to write. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.